Hello, everybody. Happy Monday afternoon. Yeah, right. As happy as you can make it, I guess. Hope yours is going as well as it can, considering the circumstances. It's time for another Seahawks video, but first we just hit 1,770 subscribers to the YouTube channel. Shout out to the subscribers. Special shout out to channel members Jason, Hillel, Anton, HaWKxXAsYLuM, Ryguy, Rip, Carson, Caesar, Nick, Dylan, Aaron, Joshua, zaknyfein, Washi, Let Russ Cook, Scott, Rico, and Santee. Special tip of my cap goes to those guys. The reading off all the names in every video intro is going to be retired once I get to 20 members because at a certain point the list of names just gets too long, but I'm going to continue to do so for all members until we get to 20. I will be doing video intro read-offs for people who joined the second tier of my membership that I've recently added, but for now I'm going to keep doing all members. And with that, let's go ahead and swing into the video, guys. We are talking about the Seahawks defense some more. I know people might be sick of talking about it, but that's the side of the ball that's going to determine where this season goes because I continue to believe that this offense will figure it out. Give the offense a little bit of time. Give the offense the opportunity to get some of their players back. Give the offense a little bit of time in practice, and they're going to figure it out. I'm not worried about those guys. But this defense, we just need to spend more time talking about it. So I'm going to compare this Seahawks defense to a Seahawks defense from the past, the very recent past. And I'm going to draw some contrasts and explain to you why this is especially unacceptable. So I've made a little chart here. And this, first, before we look at the current Seahawks defense, we're going to take a look at the 2018 Seahawks defense. So 2018, just 2 years ago. 2 years ago, this was the defense that we had. And I wanted to take a look at the investment that the Seahawks had in that defense. And I'm going to explain what I mean in a moment here. But first, let me establish something very important that everybody needs to understand. The 2018 Seahawks defense was good. They were right near the middle of the league in yards. They were 11th in points. They were in the top half of the league in turnovers. It wasn't a great defense. Maybe it would be a little more accurate to say it was slightly above average, but that was a pretty good defense. And this was just 2 years ago. This was a defense that you would have taken over at least half of the defenses in the NFL, probably. That was a solid NFL defense that played well enough for you to win games. And I wanted to take a look back at that defense and see how it was built and how that contrasts to what we're seeing right now. Because to take you into the time machine a little bit more, this was Ken Norton Jr.'s first year as defensive coordinator in Seattle. So he was able to put together a slightly above average defense his first year here. So let's take a look at the investment into this defense. And here's what I mean. We're going to take a look at every single player on our defense in 2018, and we're going to ask 3 questions. Is there an investment of draft capital? Is there an investment of money? And is there an investment of time? And how big are those investments? Because that's going to determine what we could have reasonably expected from that defense in 2018. And we can contrast that to what we actually got out of them. So we're going to start with the defensive line, and I'll explain to you what I'm going to do here. First, let's take a look at the starters, the top 4 guys here. Frank Clark, Quentin Jefferson, Jarran Reed, and Shamar Stephen. These 4 guys started on our defensive line. Was there an investment into these guys? Well, yes, actually. Frank Clark, we spent a second-round pick on him, 63rd overall, and we also had an investment of time into him. Going into 2018, he had 46 games, and if you count the playoffs, close to 2,000 snaps on his ledger. So we had an investment in Frank Clark, and Frank Clark played at an elite level in 2018. He had 13 sacks. And then you also had Jarran Reed, and there was a big investment here. 49th overall, a second-round pick in 2016. And we also had almost 2 seasons and over 1,200 snaps worth of action from him as well, pretty much, maybe closer to 1,150. But regardless, Jarran Reed had a healthy amount of NFL experience, and we invested in him with that draft pick we used to pick him up. So there was a solid investment with our starters because we had a big investment on an end and a big investment in a tackle. We also had a big investment, if you want to go down the list, in Rasheem Green. We used a third round pick to select him, but the thing to remember with Rasheem Green, and the thing that makes this a little bit of a caveat, is that Rasheem Green was a rookie this year and he was 21 years old, and we knew how raw he was. We liked him, but we knew he wasn't likely to be a big time contributor this year, and he wasn't. He did very, very little. He barely got on the field. So we did see a big investment here, but not necessarily one we expected to pay off in 2018, and it didn't. So I would kind of disqualify that. So you do see some big investments. You see some small ones too. Quentin Jefferson, we did use a mid-round pick on him. Okay. Shamar Stephen, we did give him over $2 million in free agency in 2018 to play for us. Okay, there's a little bit of an investment there. Jacob Martin was a low to mid-round pick in, I think, the 6th round. So there was a little bit of an investment there, a small investment. Brandon Jackson had a little bit of experience from prior years. Nazir Jones had been a mid-level pick, mid-round pick rather, and had played a little bit in the past. So you do see small investments here and there, but overall, if you take a look at this defensive line, I mean, we're not spending hardly any money on this defensive line. The only guy on this entire line making more than $2 million in 2018 was Shamar Stephen, who was one of the most unremarkable players that I can ever remember the Seahawks having. The second place was Dion Jordan, who we all remember how big of a disappointment that was after really expecting a lot from him in 2018. A couple other guys here are making just more than $1 million, Clark and Jefferson. But other than that, you're talking about a lot of guys who are barely making any money. Poona Ford may as well have played for free, given all the work he ended up doing for us in 2018. You see a lot of rookie contracts. You see a lot of vet min contracts. So there's practically no investment of money. You're also seeing there are a lot of players here who we had no time investment in. They had just gotten here, or they were rookies, or they just didn't really get on the field before. So this defensive line, there's not a big investment here. And we still got really good play from them for the most part. Frank Clark had a monster year. Jerron Reed had a monster year. Quentin Jefferson had an okay year. Jacob Martin even contributed decently. So the investment was not here. And this is going to go for the whole team. But why was the investment not on this defensive line? Because we lost Michael Bennett. Because we lost Cliff Averill. Because we lost Sheldon Richardson. The investment was made before 2018, and the investment had already been kind of cast into the ocean because we had decided to move on from Bennett, because Averill had to retire, because we couldn't keep Sheldon Richardson. So this was what we were left with. So this isn't really the defensive line that the defensive coaches in Seattle probably wanted to put out there. They probably would have wanted to put out some blue chip guys. They probably would have wanted to put out some big money guys, but we didn't have money. We already used draft capital. We didn't have guys that we had a lot of familiarity with, that we had a lot of comfort with putting out there a lot, because they didn't have that much experience with us. So this is just the defensive line. But you can see a couple areas where the team had an investment, but overall, the investment on the defensive line in 2018 going into the season was very weak. All right, now let's go to the linebackers, because here you will see a pretty decent investment. This is probably a step up, but there's also a big caveat there, so let's go through. Bobby Wagner, we had a big investment in him, obviously. The draft pick at this point doesn't really matter because it was 6 years prior to the 2018 season, but he was a mid-second round pick. We were paying him a ton of money. We had a massive investment in Wagner in terms of cap, almost $14 million. And of course, there was a massive investment of time in Bobby. He had played in 88 games, and if you count playoffs, actually closer to 100 games, and probably over 6,000 snaps. So there was a massive investment into Bobby Wagner in 2018. And he did play a very, very good season. So that investment did pay off. There was also a big investment into KJ Wright. We used a 4th round pick on him. He counted $8.2 million against the cap in 2018. And of course, before the season started, he had, if you count playoffs, almost 120 games and 7,000 snaps. If you don't count the playoffs, you still see the massive investment of time. However, it needs to be remembered that KJ Wright only played 5 games in 2018. He barely played, and he wasn't that effective when he did play. So, you know, that is something you have to cut the team a little bit of slack for, because look at who we did have to play to make up for not having KJ. Barkvarius Mingo. We had very little investment into Barkvarius, 2.6 million against the cap, which is not nothing, but it is a very small investment to make in a player. Barkvarius Mingo's not really the player we wanted to put out there. Austin Calitro. No investment into him, not even making $500,000. Not a draft pick used on him, no time invested in him, and we had to play Austin Calitro non-trivial snaps. Michael Kendricks, even less of an investment. Now, he only played 4 games, but still, he was a dude we literally picked up off the street after week 1 because we needed somebody. And then, of course, Shaquem, we did use a draft pick on him, and that's not a worthless investment, but making no money and no time spent developing him in previous years because he was a rookie. So a lot of the investment in the linebackers in 2018 was tied up in a guy who didn't get on the field until it was almost December. So if you take a look at the investment put into these linebackers, the return was pretty good. Because once again, I'll say it again, this is not the linebacker core that Pete Carroll and Ken Norton and John Schneider dreamed of putting out on the field in 2018 before the season started, but it's the one they had to because they had limited money, they had limited draft capital, they had lost a lot of players the season before, not specifically at the linebacker position, but not having KJ Wright until it was almost December was obviously a big blow. And yeah, you can just see that the investment, it's not invisible here because we are investing so much in Bobby, but we had to give a lot of snaps to players that we had very little investment in. All right, now we're going to go down to cornerback here, and once again, you'll see it once again. Look at the investment put into our cornerbacks in 2018. The only big investment we made in cornerback in 2018 was Shaquille Griffin with our 3rd-round draft pick the year before was brought in. That's the only big investment you're going to find in 2018 for our cornerbacks. Nobody is making big money. Justin Coleman was making almost $3 million, which is not nothing, but it's not big either. Nico Thorpe was making $2.2 million, but he didn't play that much on defense anyway, so he was more of a special teamer. Other than that, you'll see basically no money being spent on this position. Trey Flowers was a mid-round pick, which is not worthless, again, but the thing with Trey Flowers is he was moving from his safety position to corner. So the fact that we got anything good out of him at all is kind of a miracle. There is no way in the universe that the Seahawks coaching staff went into 2018 hoping that Trey Flowers would start at corner for them, but he did, and they found a way to make it work pretty well. They got a good return on investment from Trey Flowers. Now, Coleman was a trade. Under normal circumstances, I would say that the 205th overall pick in the draft is worthless, and I wouldn't even consider this to be an investment of any kind, but it was a trade, so we clearly coveted him, so I'm not going to dismiss that, but, you know, Coleman, small investment in him, an investment of money, draft capital, and snaps, but it's a pretty small investment. Akeem King, no investment at all. Nico Thorpe may as well be a special teamer, but if you want to consider him a defensive player, there's a small investment of money. So the cornerback position was dry. And how did this happen? Sherman was gone. Maxwell got hurt before the season started, and we couldn't even go with him. And that's how you end up with the cornerbacks that we ended up with. I think Jeremy Lane couldn't go as well. A lot of stuff happened in the prior offseason that just made it impossible for this team to field the corners that they wanted to in 2018, and they still managed to hold it together. Finally, let's go to safety, and you're going to see more of the same. There is a big investment at one particular position, of course, Earl Thomas. We used a top half of the first round pick on him way in the past, but he was still a first round pick if you want to take a look at the draft capital we invested to get him. He was making a bunch of money, $10.5 million against the cap, so there was a big money investment. And I don't even have to say how many snaps the dude played before 2018 started. He had 7,000 snaps, 8,000 probably if you're counting playoffs. So the investment in Earl was most certainly there. But other than that, Delano Hill, we did use a 3rd round pick on him, a low 3rd round pick on him. Obviously, Delano didn't pan out. This ended up being a waste of a pick, which is a strike against the front office and coach. But there was also no investment of money or time into Delano Hill going into 2018. Tedrick Thompson, kind of the same thing. We used a mid-round pick on him. We all know where that's gone, but there's no money and no time invested into him. Bradley McDougald, we did spend a decent amount of money on him. This is a pretty small cap hit, but it's not a tiny one either. We did have a little bit of time wrapped up into him because we played him the previous season a lot, and he played well for us. So when you take a look at the assets put into building this defense overall, because this is obviously it, that's all 4 positions that I'm going to go over. If you take a look at those, at the investment put, it makes sense why this defense would be bad. And the thing is, it wasn't. We had no massive investments on our defensive line. We had 2 massive investments at linebacker, one of whom missed most of the season. We had no massive investments in corner, and the one big massive investment we had at safety played 3.5 games. I didn't even mention that, but you guys all know Earl Thomas was out halfway through game 4 for this season. So we didn't even get hardly any value out of the Earl Thomas spot, and the defense still held it together. So this defense had every excuse in the book to not be very good, but it was fine. It wasn't great. It wasn't very good. Maybe it wasn't even good, but it was decent. It was above average. It got the job done. And this is the kind of stuff that made me stand by Pete Carroll back in 2018. But if you jump over to 2020, and now we're going to do the same thing for what we're seeing in 2020. We're going to take a look at all the players. We're going to take a look at the investment put forth into those players, and we're going to compare it to the results, because unlike the 2018 defense, the 2020 defense, you guys know how bad it is. It is, by yards, maybe the worst defense in NFL history. By points, it's a bad, very bad, no good defense. So however you slice it, it's a terrible defense. Let's take a look at where the investments are. So let's start with the starters on the defensive line, these 4 guys right here. We do have some draft. We do have a pretty substantial amount of draft capital investment in this starting group with LJ Collier, who was a first-round pick and is actually making $2.5 million this year, which is not nothing. And of course, Jerron Reed, who still a second-round pick, but now he's making $9.5 million. And now he has a bunch of NFL experience that should be pushing him up to another level. We should be getting more out of Jerron Reed because we invested all this time into him. If you count the playoffs, Jerron Reed's probably played 2,500 snaps for the Seahawks. We should only be doing that if we feel like the investment is worth our time. And based off the performance of the defense so far, not necessarily calling out Reed specifically, but not necessarily not doing it, it's not happening. So this front 4 does have a decent amount of investment into it. Benson Mayowa, there's no real investment here. There's a little bit of money, $3 million, which is not nothing, but it's not a big investment either. So there's not a big investment in Mayowa, I'll admit that. Poona Ford, there's an investment of snaps, which is not nothing either, but we're not paying him very much money. We didn't draft him. So I can understand that Poona is not necessarily somebody we can expect to be some monster contributor given the investment we put into him. You can go down the list here. Dunlap, we did trade for him, so that's at least a small investment that we put into Dunlap, and he is making $2 million, or counting $2 million against the cap for us this year, which is a reasonably sized investment, but not a big investment into Dunlap overall. Same for Alton Robinson. We did use a 5th-round pick on him, but not making any money, and he's a rookie with a bum-off season. Demontre Moore, very little investment. Rasheem Green, I'm not going to hold this against the team. He got hurt in the first game. He just got back. But it needs to be said that the inexperience and youth and raw excuse no longer flies. He needs to start balling out if he wants to justify the investment that the Seahawks have made in him. And then you have your stragglers down here, Bullard, Monet, and Rush. Banking very little money, very little experience between the 3 of them with this team. no draft capital involved in any of them, so I'm not going to hold anything against them. But if you compare this defensive line to the defensive line from 2018, the investment is probably about the same. We don't have anybody on this defensive line that we've invested the farm into. But once again, you see a few pieces with a big investment and a few pieces with a small investment. So, okay, defensive line, the investment has not changed. And I know I keep using that word, but that's kind of the key word of the day. But the thing is, unlike after 2017, when we had to ship out a whole bunch of really good players for reasons that weren't necessarily our fault, you didn't really see that in 2019. We did let some players go, but it wasn't like after 2017 when there was like an exodus. So I think the fact that we don't have a big investment on the defensive line could be viewed as an indictment on the front office, but that's up for debate. We're going to go ahead and move on from the defensive line, and we're going to go to linebacker, and we're going to keep all this in mind as we go forward. So, linebackers, the investment is massive this year. Bobby Wagner, still a massive investment in him. The draft pick we used 8 years ago. I know it doesn't matter anymore, but there it is. $15 million almost against the cap, and over 9,000. Yes, I'm going to say it, over 9,000 snaps if you count the playoffs, of giving him reps and developing him. And generally, you don't put that kind of time into a player unless you think they're going to be special. KJ Wright, same deal. Big investment for KJ. We used a 4th round pick on him 9 years ago, but bigger than that now is $10 million against the cap, over 9,000 snaps if you count the playoffs over his career in Seattle. So massive investment in those two guys. And I'm not saying those guys are playing poorly, although I think Bobby has played poorly in at least a few games this year. The defense is not showing anything for it. And we're not even done, by the way. Jordan Brooks, big investment with him using a 1st round pick, 27th overall, $2.2 million, also not completely trivial. So there's a big investment in Jordan Brooks. Bruce Irvin, he got hurt after 2 games, so I'm not going to hold this against the team, but there was a big investment in bringing in Bruce Irvin and giving him $6 million, which he is currently still counting against the cap despite his injury. Even Cody Barton, not a huge investment, but the 88th overall pick. You could argue the 88th overall pick is actually a pretty big investment, so let's just go ahead and make this a big investment. So look at all these resources we've invested into linebacker just to have the worst defense in franchise history and one of the worst in NFL history. It's mind-boggling. All right, we're moving on to cornerback here, and we've had to play a lot of corners, and I will cut this team some slack. We've had real injury problems at the cornerback position this year. It's not easy. Nevertheless, let's take a look at this. Shaquille Griffin. We now have a sizable investment into Shaquille Griffin. He was still a 3rd round pick, but now he has close to 3,000 snaps total worth of experience, 45 games worth of experience, $2.3 million against the cap this year, so that's gone up significantly. He's counting a good deal more against the cap. So Shaquille Griffin is now a significant investment of this team. He was already a decent-sized investment 2 years ago. Now he's a big one. And overall, I don't think we've seen a good return on that investment so far in 2020. Quentin Dunbar, I'm not going to say it was a big investment, but we did trade for him. The 162nd overall pick might not sound like a big deal, and it's not, but we coveted him. We saw that guy and went, I think that guy can help us win. I think that guy makes us a better team. Let's go get him. And we got him. And he is making or counting $3.4 million against the cap this year, so that's a non-trivial investment into a defensive player who, I will grant you, is clearly not healthy, but it is what it is. Marquis Blair, big investment here, 47th overall, 2nd round pick. You played him a little bit last year. He got a little bit of experience. I know he got hurt, but still, the investment is there. Not a big monetary investment, but we should be seeing more from Blair given the fact that we invested this much in him and the fact that we're not. Some of it has to do with bad luck. I know he got hurt, but Do you see what I'm saying when I point out the fact that the investment on the defense is way higher than it was in 2018, and yet the result is far worse? We can keep going. Trey Flowers. In 2018, we had no investment into Trey Flowers but a fifth round pick. Now, not only do we have that fifth round pick invested, we also have 2,000 snaps counting playoffs. 2,000 plus snaps into a cornerback tells me, okay, maybe he's not great right now, but he'll be great in the future. If we didn't think that, why would we be playing him when he's so young and playing, average to slightly above average football? The fact that we're putting this young player out there over and over tells me that we see great things in Trey Flowers' future. And it's not happening. We all know how Trey is playing this year, and to his credit, he's played okay the last couple games, but overall this year he's been a complete wreck. And this investment of time, which is big, is now looking like a sunk cost. Ugo Amadi. I'm not here to rag on Ugo, but it needs to be pointed out that there was an investment into him of a fourth round pick, I think. Yeah, I think that's a fourth round pick. So fourth round pick on him, and he's playing pretty well. So I'm not using this as an opportunity to bash on Ugo because I don't think Ugo deserves that at all. He's actually not even played the last couple games, but the investment is not matching the results on the field. Now, we do have three guys here who played a little corner this year who we have no investment in. DJ Reed, Lyndon Stevens, Demarius Randall. No draft capital used, no experience with the team prior, and very little money. So I understand those guys are not going to be the greatest players. You have nothing at stake with them. But the guys that we do have a big stake in, such as Trey Flowers and his 2,000 plus snaps over the last 2 years, Shaquille Griffin and his 3,000 snaps over the past 3 years, you should be seeing return on that. And we're not. The defense is worse than it's ever been, and it's one of the worst in NFL history, or at least trending that way. And let's do safety because, oh my God, does it get worse. Look at the size of the investment into Jamal Adams. And I know Jamal Adams got hurt and he missed a month, or almost 4.5 games, but this investment into one player, a first rounder, a third rounder, and a player who is, by the way, pretty good, this is massive, doesn't even begin to describe it. So I understand that he wasn't healthy for quite a few of our games, but this, at the end of the day, when you invest this much into a defense, then the defense needs to be playing a little better. Quandre Diggs, not a big pick we gave up to get him, the 172nd pick overall in the draft last year, or this year, but we did trade for him, and he is counting $5.2 million against the cap. That's pretty significant. So we have a nice investment of money in Quandre Diggs, and Delano Hill still hanging around. I know he's hurt, but 95th overall pick a few years ago. We played him a decent amount the last several years. He's got experience. There's no reason why we should be okay with Delano Hill not helping us win. So, yeah, if you go down this defense and you take a look at the investments made, it doesn't even compare to 2018. The investment is so much higher because we didn't have to have a massive team exodus before the season. We didn't have to get rid of Sherman, Cam, Maxwell, well, not Earl, but pretty quickly we had to get rid of Earl, and then we had to deal with KJ's injury, and you got rid of Bennett and Averill and Richardson, all that stuff that happened in 2017. The team had every excuse to field a garbage squad in 2018, and they didn't. 2 years later, the wounds of losing those guys, they're gone. We don't have those problems anymore. We don't have a bunch of dead cap from all these guys we had to let go. We don't have all this missing draft capital because we gave it up to get guys who only stuck around a year like Sheldon Richardson. And yet, it seems like we've wasted a lot of time, money, and draft capital on guys who, even if they're playing okay, they're not making this defense anything more than one of the worst in NFL history. And that leads me to my final point. Do not give anybody a pass for the way this defense is playing. This defense is owned by Ken Norton Jr., Pete Carroll, and John Schneider. They all own this defense. There's no excuse for the way this defense has been producing this season, looking at the investment that those three guys decided to make into them. And with that, I'm out of here. Peace out, Go Hawks. Check for a stream later, and we done.